speaking point. All right, so a little background about the state of Arizona. The state's a pretty large place, as Michael mentioned. There's over 130 different agencies. If you count different appointees and commissions that are out there as well, there's about 170 agencies that we track, entities that we track at the state. It's about a $27 billion budget. About a third of that is state funds, whereas about 2/3 of that is from the federal government. We have over 32,000 employees, depending on which system you're tracking. If you track the police force and some other systems as well, it's about 37,000 employees. We have over 1,450, almost 1,500 IT employees in the state, and about another 500 IT contractors. So it's not a humongous environment, but it's also not a small environment either. And just recently we did a survey to find out exactly how many data centers and server rooms that we have, and there's over 100 that we identified, which has, issues all over the place, as you can tell, right? Yeah, way too many. So Kieran, my chief technology officer, is sitting up here in the front too to answer all sorts of questions. But one of our big pushes has been to move to the cloud, and that's been a huge focus for us. So my organization is called, I work for the Department of Administration for the Arizona Strategic Enterprise Technology Office. We are responsible for oversight of all IT projects in the state. We have over 200 projects that we're currently monitoring, about 850 projects, $850 million worth of projects. We do well over billions and billions of dollars in transactions, and over 1 billion transactions just on our mainframe alone on an annual basis. We have a substantially large network as well. We do over 500,000 calls a day, a few terabytes of data. We just added another facility. We just did a procurement for an external data center where we're going to, working with the private sector, we're going to start to consolidate some of our data centers. So it's actually 672 facilities that we manage across the entire state now. And there are about 1,500 publicly facing URLs. Over 100 of those Kieran's team has built and managed. And we do about $70 million worth of transactions on those apps alone, and millions of transactions. So it's going to be a little funky on some of this stuff as it translates over. So imagine that the top says BHAG, Big, Hairy, Audacious Goal, right? So if you've ever read any of Jim Collins' books, Good to Great, Great by Choice, I don't know if you guys have. If you haven't, absolutely suggest it from a leadership perspective. The concept of a BHAG is taking it kind of beyond the mission or beyond the vision, right? A BHAG is supposed to be something that's not attainable in a 5, 10, maybe even 20 or 30 year period. It's something that's supposed to challenge your organization. It's supposed to challenge the way that you think. And if you start to ask yourself every single time that you go to make a decision, will this get me closer or further away from what my BHAG is? Your organization will start to transition. And so when we started this, we didn't have a mission, we didn't have a vision, and so we really set out to say, how do we transform the state? How do we transform the entire state, right? It's very federated, it's very giant, but how do we slowly start to change things? And so borrowing from, and if you go out and Google BHAG, there's a great Wikipedia article about it, lists a bunch of different organizations' BHAGs. Microsoft's is probably the most famous one, a computer on every desk. It was referenced this morning, right? My personal favorite is Amazon's, and that's every book ever written anywhere in the world in less than 60 seconds, right? So we kind of borrowed from that saying, what if we can enable agencies to start to deliver their services anywhere at any time for every Arizona? And we started to talk about what are the use cases for citizens, what are the use cases for businesses, but also what are the use cases for employees. And that's where we started to do this out. You know you're starting to get traction when the other state agencies, legislative liaisons, are talking about assets BHAG in meetings about where they're talking about laws. And so we started to getting feedbacks from, that we're starting to change the culture, that people are thinking about it. And as you start to make one decision, 5 decisions, 100 decisions, and start moving towards that, it starts to make a change really quickly. So when we first started, we didn't want to be... I worked for a company before, and we went through a mission kind of journey before, and the mission that kind of stuck, even though it's kind of the pseudo one, was we suck less. Anybody ever work at a company where that's a mission, right? If you can suck less than you did yesterday, you're better off, right? So we didn't want to be better than other government agencies. We didn't want to be better than other states. we really wanted to go out and look at how are the best organizations doing things. And so we started looking at organizations like USAA, Southwest Airlines, Papa John's, DirecTV. Again, if you've ever, read those Jim Collins books, they're great because they do a lot of that analysis, research analysis to what makes a good company great, right? What makes an organization amazing, right? And really that comes down to the culture and how things are done, right? So that's where we kind of started the conversation. And this started about over 3 years ago now at this point. The other thing, so as we started to kind of hone in on industries, we kind of wanted to walk through use cases. We wanted to talk through, how many of you guys remember your mom and pop video store, right? Please be kind, rewind, right? Remember that? Then Blockbuster came along and decimated the mom and pop video store, and then Netflix and Redbox have come along, and who's been to a Blockbuster in the past 2 years, right? Nobody, right? And so the business models change, and technology is absolutely innovating and making that possible to change those business models. So how can we borrow? How can we learn from how other business models are changing, and how can we start to apply that to government? And so we spent a lot of time talking about that. And it's obviously continued to change, right? I mean, I just finished ripping all of my DVDs that I had. And, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of DVDs, right? And so now I use Plex server and I got my media server set up at home, right? But I don't even buy DVDs anymore, but I still want access to those old videos, right? So things just continue to change even beyond this. One of the other models that we talk about often is the Amazon model. And, Amazon's a great platform, but one of the things that really pivotally changed is if you've never read, there's a great article called the Google Amazon Rant, just Google it. And it's written by an engineer that spent about 7.5 years at Amazon and then moved over to Google and was at Google for about 7.5 years as well. And he's comparing and contrasting the two organizations. And really what it comes down to is Bezos came out with this mandate and said that all data will be shared via an API, right? No exceptions. And and that really pivoted and it changed the organization. I boxed the 28 views there, right? Because that was that pivotal point where by exposing APIs and allowing other people to use the platform, it changed the business model of the organization. We had the amazing opportunity to tour one of the largest distro centers for Amazon last year. And it was crazy because they took us, we were there to kind of talk to their IT folks and how they operationalize their IT and stuff. And we went into their server room and there was 2 racks and each was about half capacity, right? This facility is massive. You can't even see one end to the other end of the facility. It's like 3 miles, it's over a mile long, it's like 3 miles, if you walk around it, and it's 3 stories inside this building, right? If you've ever seen the movie Monsters, you got little kids or grandkids, right? Remember the door scene where all the doors are just whizzing by? It's like that inside there. It's crazy how phenomenal it is. And all of the compute is in the cloud. So there's a print server, there's a domain server, there's a couple other servers, and then there's a rack of computers for their vendors that manage all those machines that are out there on the floor. And where it really hit home was at the end of the tour, when we came to this point where it's boxing everything up, putting a label on it, and it goes from, it closes the box, sticks a sticker on it, and moves it out. And it's all happening like this. And it's going to their Virginia data centers, I think where it was, right? And so it's scanning the box, going to Virginia, coming back, printing the label, right? It's so amazing, it's so quick on how they're all doing that. And it's all, again, because of APIs, right? So we also looked at the financial services industry, and there was a point where these things called ATMs came out, right? My grandma still won't use an ATM. She's 86. We'll give her a pass. I actually think that might be her in the stolen cement mixer. But there's somebody's got a chart out there someplace where people stopped going into the bank and started using ATMs, right? And so how do you take that same concept? How do you take the same concept of people standing in line or calling on the phone to using an application to coding against an API to change how business is done? It's not an easy thing. You have to change culture. You have to get people involved. You have to educate people. You have to provide capabilities and platforms in order to be able to do that. And so the financial industry has also been a big impact for us. We also, I used to joke and say the only time I would ever go to a bank or an ATM was to deposit a check. Well, they fixed that for us too, right? And so again, we're constantly questioning ourselves and asking our sister agencies, how can you use technology? How can you make your consumer's life better, right? Because that's what this is all about, and I think it's been a common theme throughout this whole conference is how do you make that human experience better, right? So we really started talking about Mint. And how many of you guys have ever used Mint? So we love the concept of Mint, right? Because it does a couple things. First, it requires that you authenticate against the platform, right? You have to have a username, password. You have to authenticate against the platform. The second thing you have to do is you have to authorize a third-party organization to allow a read-only view of sensitive information, right? So think about those two use cases and how it applies to government. If I could authenticate a user, a citizen, a business, or an employee, and then I could go out and authorize against these 170 different agencies that have information about those people or businesses, right? And then aggregate it back into one place, wouldn't that be an amazing platform that could totally transform government, right? And that really comes back to that BHAG that we have, is how do we enable every service, anywhere, at any time, to every Arizonan, right? And so this is what we've really been working on for the past couple of years, is how do we create a Mint-like platform for state government? And how do we enable those capabilities with all the different data consumers and producers across the board? We also really liked the concept of Facebook's timeline, right? Because government knows everything about you from when you're born to when you die, and a whole bunch of different transactions in between. And wouldn't it be interesting from a citizen, business, or employee perspective if we could aggregate that into one place, right? Because a lot of times, governments, I tell my friends all the time, I was not a government guy. I've only been in government for about 5 years, private sector all before that. And I had no idea what government was before I came. And it is so infinitely more complicated than I would have ever guessed. It is an industry of industries. You name it. We've got healthcare, tax collection, water and infrastructure. We've got construction. We've got transportation. You name it, we've got it. We've got massive projects associated with all of that, right? And so how do you get that information, and how do you expose it to the right person at the right time with the right credentials and the right security and all that stuff? So we're constantly also talking about that concept of the timeline. The last one that really kind of influenced the direction that we were is I did work for Intel at one point, and one of the things I loved about working for Intel in their e-business group, how's that for a term? Did that bring you back in a couple of years? But in their e-business group, they had this platform, and it offered different capabilities. And when I came to the state, every single time that we would look at an application or we'd look at all these different apps, they're all one-offs. That's an app there, that's an app there, that's an app there. Everything started at scratch, right? Whereas when I worked for Intel, it provided different capabilities. So you didn't start at 1, you started at 3, or maybe you started at 5, maybe you started at 7, depending on the application. And then there was capabilities that we could also leverage, right? So there was a user bus that allowed us to, so I didn't have to worry about user management. That was all taken care of for me, right? So if somebody left the company, they were automatically removed from the access to our platform. What a concept, right? So we have that exact problem at the state. We've got all these different applications and all these different problems, right? So that really started to create some driving factors for us as we started to build out a platform. So right now today, I told you we're pretty heavy into the cloud. We've got over 350 instances in AWS. We have 353 zones and 6,200 DNS records in our AWS Route 53 for DNS service. We do about $168 million worth of financial transactions. 70 million of that's currently on our platform. We have over about 1,500 public-facing websites I was telling you about. Our platform today, we counted just for the month of October before we came here. We've got over 100 websites built on this platform, fundamentally using a lot of different WSO2 components. We had 8 million page views in October, 1.3 million users, 50% desktop, about 50% mobile, 150 million DNS requests, 116 million web requests, 3 terabytes of CDN data transferred to our users, while we only had 6 megabits back to the originating servers. So it's not, again, a giant platform compared to many organizations, but it's also not chump change for just a couple of days in October at this point. So as far as objectives, we really wanted to set up, what are our core capabilities? We want to have payment processing. We want to have single sign-on. We want to have digital signatures, workflows. We want open data, shared between agencies. That's really become one of our use cases for us. So we've got the Department of Environmental Quality, and we're working with them. We're partnering with them on an application. And the current workflow is they take a paper application, they type in the name of the corporation, right? Well, as you can guess, people can be creative in how they write the name of their company. People can get creative in how they type the name of the company, right? And that can cause all sorts of issues. One of the databases that we support has 37 different ways to spell Microsoft, right? Makes making a report a little bit challenging. You should see how we spell Office, right? So, I mean, that all of a sudden turns into thousands and thousands of iterations of Microsoft Office, right? So I don't even know how many instances we have because of that very problem. So we worked with the Corporation Commission, which is responsible for registering and licensing businesses in the state, right? And how do we expose that information out to this Department of Environmental Quality to be able to use that information? And so we're constantly looking at those types of things. Lottery is another example where up until a couple months ago, organizations that wanted lottery information, they were doing screen scraping against the lottery's website. So now we've got an API that exposes that. The names of cities and towns, again, that was another API that we've been implemented. Services, directory of employees, agency names, those are all different types of things that we're trying to standardize on to try to create golden sets of information. Security and monitoring is absolutely huge for us. So being able to do, the single logon again, multi-factor authentication, those are all critical components. I'm going to briefly touch on this. We can come back to it if you guys have questions, but this is, kind of a high-level example of what our architecture is today. Again, most of this is all hosted in Amazon. So we've got our load balancers, Stratus load balancers are up there. Identity server is another one of the huge use cases that we're working on right now. Because of these 170 different entities, we've got all these federated domains. We've got a new ERP system that's going in, and we want to be able to have all the accountants be able to log into the system with be able to use their domain ID, right? I know it's quite the concept, but we're kind of radical like that. But once we have that in place, then we can start putting any other application against that from our single sign-on from an identity management perspective. So huge for security, huge for removing duplicate effort across the stage there. One more picture. All right.
So you're running Stratus in production.
What's up? So,
you're running Stratus in production.
We are. Yep. So I'll let Kieran talk to that in a sec. So just real quick, I'll wrap this up for you. Whenever we look at when we talk about strategy, we really talk about 4 aspects of the strategy, and we're constantly talking about this, even to the governor herself. We talk about what the strategy is, but we talk about what the culture is, we talk about what the platform is, we talk about what the service is. So I told you from this program's perspective, our culture, our strategy is to, the BHAG, right? How do we enable every service, anywhere, at any time, by every citizen, right? By every Arizonan, right? And again, back to that BHAG, we don't need to do that next week. We don't need to do it next year. We will have a 10, 20-year vision of how do we change the state to be able to offer these services in this manner. And it's going to take that time. It will. We have to change how we contract. We have to change how we budget. We have to change how we plan. All of that stuff has to go into this. The other thing that we're doing is you got to change the culture. Peter Drucker, I love his quote of "culture eats strategy for breakfast," right? And that is so true, right? And so we got into this, and you can imagine state government, we've had to deal with it, right? So when we first came out, we came up with this strategy. Everybody said, "Oh, that'll never work in the state of Arizona," right? And so I came up with a different saying to meet Peter Drucker's, and I said, well, if you can define the strategy, why can't we define the culture, right? And so we actively, aggressively started to define what our culture is. This is kind of an interesting picture. It's kind of odd, hard to see, but we kicked all the managers out of their offices. We turned them into collaboration rooms. We lowered all the wall heights to waist height. We have implemented, there's a total of 37 different collaboration spaces. We don't even call them meetings anymore, right? We call them collaborations because if you look up the technical definition of a meeting, it just means to get together and chat, whereas collaborate means to actually deliver something, right? And so the front office looks like it's pretty Google-esque, it's pretty startup-esque as you come in. It's got It's got two 27-inch monitors, not TVs, because we're government, we can't buy TVs, right? so we've got two 75-inch monitors sitting in the front right there. And we have all sorts of different slides with cool quotes and all sorts of things. It's got quotes on the front. One of them's from Socrates, right? It basically says, if you're going to change an organization, focus on the positive, right? There's another quote from me on there that says, fail fast, fail forward. So that's absolutely what our culture is. So we had to address that very aggressively. The other thing, back to services, right? This is one of my favorite slides in the entire world. If you can't see what it is, it's ketchup and mustard, right? And I love the hand that somebody added to the picture pointing at the grilled cheese sandwich up there. Basically, we waited 30 minutes, no service. I've got an entire deck that I focus around this slide, and I have menus from restaurants and all sorts of things. But you got to think about what people expect. We all know what we expect when we go into a greasy spoon. We expect decent food, right? We expect good service. There's a lot of things we expect from a service perspective. But somehow in IT, we don't think about that, right? And we have to level set what the expectations of what service should be from an IT perspective. So we're constantly talking about that. We do a lot of tabletop exercises where we challenge assumptions. We make people say what they assume out loud, and then we talk about it. I'm not saying it's good or bad. Is it okay to make a customer wait 48 hours? In some cases, absolutely. In other cases, no freaking way. Right? So we're constantly talking about that. And then last, we've been working on this platform, right? So I kind of walked you through all the things that we looked at. We've been working on a platform, it's called the Arizona Enterprise Services Platform. And it's everything from the middleware components where we're using the WSO2 stuff. It's the data layers. It's a whole infrastructure of Drupal on the front end. And we're working on a Mint-like type interface called MyAZ to be able to expose that information, expose those services to citizens, businesses, and employees. And so, last but not least, and then I'll let you guys ask questions, whatever you get commitment, you got to deliver on it. So that's it for me. So I know you guys probably have some good questions about the technical stuff, so that's why I made Kieran sit up front.
So one of the questions is now in production. So every single component that's in there, we have in production from the WSO2 side, from ESP to apps to government register to API manager and all that. So we have 5 different environments from dev to integration to QA to staging to production. Like I said, we have lottery, we have corporation commission, we have DOAs, internal services that we are exposing. We're working closely with sister agencies like DEQ and other agencies too. So it's absolutely in production. We just went live last week of August. We started our journey kind of May of last year. That's when we engaged WSO2 to do the quick start program. Initially on, we thought maybe we can figure this out in 2 months, but this is something that we should make sure that absolutely engage WSO2. So kind of December is when we started having engagement with WSO2. It kind of took us good 7 months or so for us to go live, but it's in production. The big components that we are leveraging today are the identity server with the single sign-on, with the multi-factor authentication with Microsoft Azure, the API manager. That's something we use very heavily for lottery and state fair and corporation commission and all the other. ESP is the other one for doing lots of service chaining and mediation. That's the other component we're using. Lots of open source tools from Chef to Puppet to Drupal to MySQL to all the middleware stack that WSO2 provides. So we are a heavy user of the open source product and community.
And all of our code is then published back out on GitHub as open source as well.
Yeah, there's some things that
data in the cloud.
What's that? Sorry.
Data in the cloud.
So we
some is, yeah.
Some is.
Yep.
Absolutely.
We have a whole security presentation we go through how we've done that too. So.
How many users are we talking?
How many users?
I think over 1 million. Yeah, we've had over 1 million unique users on the platform.
Yeah. From the actual employees, this is high to active directory. So that's 35,000 plus employees, plus when you include the contractors and non-employees and all that one. We're also working with HR to onboard the retirees and also all the citizens, right? So it's, again, we enable single sign-on through the social logins and all that. That's one piece we haven't gone live, but we're working closely with WSO2 staff to kind of enable those, the OAuth. So we have 3 different user stores. So Active Direct for employees. We didn't want to mix up the citizens and businesses with that, so there's a JDBC store for the citizens. And so we kind of isolate, 3 different data stores. Yeah, it's completely multi-tenant. It's elastic. It's all in Amazon, so it scales up and down, based on the demand. The band with the CEP manages the workloads and creates new instances or spins down new instances and all that. From get-go, we had to make sure it's a multi-tenant because of how federated we are. So this is something that all our agencies can leverage and make sure that their data is isolated, that this can still share the information at the API level, or they could leverage the ESP capabilities or the other business tools or API manager.
How did you decide what services to expose and what data to expose? Like what should be the interface?
So let me ask before you do. We beg. What's your answer?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, we are fortunate enough to work with some of the customers. Like Log is a good example, right? So they were on a proprietary .NET system, so their system was not able to handle the volume. So we took the opportunity of streamlining. So we actually redid their entire website, the entire backend. So we put everything through the WSO2. At that time, we said, okay, are you okay if we leverage, your data and expose it, right? Because, the funny thing is, after we did everything, I said, this is so great. We've been looking for doing this one, but they didn't have the resources, they didn't have the maturity and skill set. So that project helped us.
Neither did we, but
yeah. But the same with Corporation Commission, same with State Fair and all that. So I think building those relationships, but also begging in some of the instances, saying we really want to expose the data so citizens and businesses can leverage and build services around it too.
And what to expose, right? Because that's mostly API, so it needs to be lightweight. So how did you decide the granularity and all these things?
So it depends, right? You're absolutely right. It depends on what kind of data. So there are some data sets, you can publicly make it available. For the other ones, you're going through the security, through the ESP and DSS, JAX-RS, and making sure that the right security and right controls are there. And we didn't want to take 10 APIs for the same, for 10 different customers, right? So it's one API, but then expose different feeds, based on who's calling, and the whole security, is there from top down, from all the way from when the call comes in to all the way to the backend system.
For the open data, did you use different license models depending on the type of data that you're making available?
Yeah, so we are working on data sharing agreements. Internally, who is the publisher, who is the subscriber, and who is the business, right? If they need, is it a cost sharing model? Is it, is that something that the third party is going to sell it, to somebody else, right?
Exactly.
So we're working through. I think there's no one golden rule. There's different for different use cases. So we have to take it. So we have a template that we have, but each one we have an addendum for the type of use case.
Yeah, legal is absolutely involved. I mean, the data owner is concerned, the data consumer is concerned, right? Because if we build an app that uses somebody else's data, we want to know that it's up 24/7. We want to know about any downtimes ahead of time, right? I mean, it gets complicated really fast as you start getting into it. Last one.
You would have had a lot of on-premise resources that you need to reach to as you build new services here. What kind of challenges did you have, and how did you deal with reaching out to on-premise resources, like databases, existing systems? It's not a new tool you're working.
Sure. We work closely with WSO2, but also with Amazon, who is our infrastructure provider, to kind of figure out. So, it's funny that at the same time we are doing this, we're also on a different path and different journey to move all the services to cloud. So we were going in parallel. Was it the right approach? I don't know. But I think we had to do it because of the timing and all that. So we leverage a lot of the resources from Amazon to make sure the architecture is set up right. It's really an extension of our data center. We made sure that the VPCs are set up the right way, our security policies, the firewalls are set up the right way. We made sure that the regions and zones are set up in the right way, making sure that the data, what type of data is being exposed to the cloud, and how do you secure it, how do you manage it. So a lot of work went in, but it's also a learning process internally, but we leverage vendors quite a bit for.
Well, thank you guys very much.